Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. It is show number 35 of the MMA podcast that brings you fighting talk with a distinctly British flavour. My name's Simon Head, and guess who's back this week? Mr. Chamatkar Sandhu. How are you, buddy?
I'm very well, Si. I had a nice break in Orlando, Florida. I was there for the WrestleMania festivities. Had a good time, got a bit of a tan. Took me a while to kind of recover from the jet lag, which is why I was absent on last week's show. But I'm fully rested, recovered and fresh, and ready to talk a bit of MMA with you today.
Fantastic. One thing, before we launch into this, we've got UFC on Fox to talk about, which took place at the weekend. We've got your questions that we're obviously going to answer. We do that every week. And we'll throw things forward to next weekend's event in Nashville, Tennessee, as Cub Swanson headlines against the Russian hammer Artem Lubov. But we've got a couple of stories that are developing as we speak, Mr. Sandhu, that I thought we should quickly touch on. First one, I don't know, this is almost a redundant question. I was going to say, I don't know how much of Twitter you've been on today. You're always on Twitter, so you're probably well aware of this. Jimmy Manuwa is doing a pretty good job of pushing DC's buttons right now. And he's really sort of poking the bear a little bit and trying to get DC to agree to a title fight. And DC's beginning to react, and I don't think we've ever really seen him like this on social. Well, I don't think we've seen either of them like this on social media before. Jimmy's not really a big trash talker, but I think he knows what he needs to do to get the fight. And DC's reacting to him. This is quite a positive sign, I think, if you're looking for a Jimmy Manuwa title fight this summer. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think DC's, a veteran, and he's done this before. He's kind of interacted with Jon Jones a hell of a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. In any form of media, social media, actual media, but this is great stuff from Jimmy. I have been paying attention. It's all kind of sprouted up in the last couple of hours or so, and this is exactly what I wanted to see out of Jimmy. He's starting to kind of really call his shot. He was in Vegas before he went to the Buffalo card last weekend, and then I believe he went back to Vegas, and I saw he was there with his manager Audi Attar. For those of you who don't know, Audi Attar is also the manager of one Conor McGregor. So he's a powerhouse when it comes to management, especially in our MMA circles. And so who knows, maybe they've struck a title fight, which they're waiting to announce. Maybe it was just a new fight contract for Jimmy. Maybe it was all about the David Haye fight. Who knows? But I think Jimmy's eyes are firmly set on trying to get that title shot. And obviously, you've got Gustafsson fighting in Stockholm next month. And if he wins that fight, he's going to have a case to make for himself as well to get another crack at DC. And I think Jimmy, what he needs to do, and what he's done today, is just make sure that he's firmly set himself in position to try and get that next title shot. If they make DC defend his title once more before Jon Jones comes back, that's the question. Will he wait for Jon Jones, or will he take one more fight before Jon Jones comes back? And like. This is all you can ask for him. Jimmy's doing everything that he can do. This is the kind of stuff in the next couple of hours and tomorrow morning that'll start to make a lot of headlines, and more power to him.
Yeah, I think this could play quite nicely into Jimmy Manuwa's hands. I think he needs to be getting the fight booked before Alexander Gustafsson fights Glover Teixeira, because the last thing he needs is for his own teammate to then be thrown into the mix. I think any fight with Jon Jones or DC that involves Alexander Gustafsson is an instant hit before you even start, because they've got the backstory, they've had those epic encounters already. But you do get the impression that DC thinks that Jimmy's going to be relatively light work. That's certainly the line he's putting out there at the moment, and I think that plays into Jimmy's hands. I think if Cormier wants to get a fight in before Jones comes back, then why not fight this guy that he thinks he can beat easily? So, if in his mind, if he thinks it's an easy win, why not take a fight during International Fight Week? Get on that big UFC 213 card, more of which in a minute. Maybe get on that fight card, maybe with another big name, more drawing power, one of the biggest fight weekends of the year. Get those pay-per-view points, get those dollars in the bank, and fight this guy who... It appears, at least, he thinks he can beat quite easily. Seems like a no-brainer. If you're Jimmy Manuwa, that's exactly what you want him to think, and that's exactly what you want him to do. The last thing you want him to do is to think, do you know what, I'll wait for Jon Jones. Or do you know what, I'd rather fight Gustafsson again. I don't think DC would want to fight Gustafsson before fighting John Jones. In his mind, I think that's a more dangerous fight for him, because he said no one has pushed him harder than Alexander Gustafsson has. So I think Jimmy's in a good spot because he's being slightly underrated, I would say, but he's also in position, and the conversation has started. DC went to him at the end of that fight and started drawing in his direction. That, I thought, was telling. That tells me that he wants that fight. But he then teed up John Jones for further down the line. I think this is all playing really nicely into Jimmy Manuwa's hands. And as a Brit, it would be great to see him in a world title fight. Now, we took UFC 213, a massive rumour that is beginning to pick up some steam today. Conor McGregor hit Instagram, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and posted saying his next fight is going to be announced soon. There has been a rumour today that suggests that Mr. Tyron Woodley will take on Conor McGregor for the undisputed welterweight championship of the world at UFC 213, which is that showpiece event in International Fight Week. That would undoubtedly be the main event. Conor McGregor's not going to fight anywhere other than on the top of the bill. So if you're Daniel Cormier, you'd probably be quite happy to sit as the co-main underneath the Conor McGregor fight. That'd be a huge earner for you. But Conor McGregor versus Tyron Woodley, going for, could he be the champ by the end of Fight Week in the summer? It's the sort of fight that the UFC need to give him if they want him to get in the octagon before he faces Floyd Mayweather. So I think there's some legs to this. I'd love to see the Nate Diaz fight again as well. I think Tony Ferguson, while he's probably from a meritocracy standpoint the most deserving next guy in line right now, I don't think he's going to get the fight somehow. McGregor, if he steps in with a fight with Tyron Woodley, he loses nothing. You know what I mean? He's not going to lose his belts, or his belt rather. He's looking to add rather than defend, which he's been his policy all the way through. What do you think? Do you like the idea? Would you be happy with that? What do you make of it?
I like the idea in the sense it keeps Conor McGregor in MMA. I like the idea that it keeps him within the UFC rather than him enter a 20-by-20 boxing ring and fight, or not even fight, box Floyd Mayweather. Because I think pretty much all of us know exactly what direction that boxing match will be headed towards. Now, if it goes down the Floyd Mayweather route, don't get me wrong, I think you and me, Simon, both, and everybody involved will be all about and really fall in love with the spectacle of the event, because that's a major part of why we like combat sports in the first place. The spectacle, the hype, the promotion, the build-up. It'll give us plenty of talking points. But once that's all done and it comes the night of the fight, it's not going to be competitive. It's not going to be. It'll be kind of exciting, and I'm sure you'll be able to cut the electricity with a knife. But once that bell kind of rings, we know what's going to happen. It'll be Mayweather just picking McGregor apart, getting it done within the distance most likely. But if it means keeping McGregor within the UFC and in MMA, then why not? Now, you mentioned Woodley, dropping an Instagram post today telling everyone that fight camp has started, and then you have to wonder, well, who's he supposed to be fighting? Because Damian Maia's booked, Jorge Masvidal's booked, and those are the only two likely welterweights that are, from, I suppose, a purist point of view and meritocracy point of view, deserving of a crack at his belt. I mean, who else is there? Is it possible that Nick Diaz have they called on Nick Diaz to fight Tyron Woodley? Is it Nate Diaz jumping up to 170 again? I mean, I think that was the only kind of realm of fights that Woodley was looking at in terms of a money fight. He was looking for a McGregor or a Diaz fight. I mean, it'd be amazing if it is going to be McGregor. I mean, considering that the lightweight championship or the interim lightweight title fight fell to pieces with Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, And you've got the featherweight title fight coming up with Jose Aldo and Max Holloway. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I suppose, some intrigue into finding out whether this is going to be a fight that the UFC are going to announce. If I'm a betting man, Simon, I still think that the fight announcement on McGregor's side is going to be Mayweather for a September showdown. I think there's just been so much publicity behind it from both ends over the course of the last 6 months or so, that it's going to be now or never, especially at Mayweather's age. But I'll be surprised if it is going to be Woodley. And if it isn't Woodley McGregor, then I'm very intrigued to find out who Woodley will be fighting. Because as I mentioned, the guys that are rightfully deserving of a title shot, they're booked.
That's it. I think there are only two other options for Tyron Woodley. I think based on, unless they're going to tear up a bout that's already been booked, there are only really two options I can see. One of them you mentioned is Nick Diaz. The other one's George St. Pierre. Don't rule that one out. I think that is still a viable option. I just think it might be. The reason why I think the McGregor thing might have legs is because Conor McGregor has been telling everyone who's prepared to listen or follow him on social media that he's fighting Floyd Mayweather. He's not made any secret of this. I'm going to fight Floyd Mayweather. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. And now he says, my next fight will be announced soon. But Conor, you've been talking to us for 8 months telling us you're fighting Floyd Mayweather. Why get coy now? Why not say, I'll give you the date for the Mayweather. The Mayweather fight will be, and we'll have a date for that soon. Why has he not said that? That slight change in approach suggests to me that maybe this Tyron Woodley thing could be a goer. It could be putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5, but I don't know. I think it's possible. I think it's possible, and it might also be a bargaining chip. It might be. There's been a lot of talk about how much money the UFC might want in order for this McGregor Mayweather fight to happen. And don't forget, they're talking September. So, McGregor will be in fight shape if he fights in early July, and will just be able to, in theory, just plough through working extensively boxing from that point on to get to September. He'll be in fight shape. He'll have been training for a fight anyway, leading in. Maybe it's one of those where it's like, okay, you want to get the big slice of the pie here, Conor. We need our slice of the pie. If we're not going to get it in these negotiations with Floyd because you need this much money, then give a little bit for us. Fight during International Fight Week. Take the big fight for us. We'll give you top of the bill. We'll give you whoever you want. Top of the bill, UFC 213. Fight then, and then we won't stand in your way. We'll take a smaller slice of the pie for the Mayweather fight, in order that fight gets done. Because even a smaller slice of the pie, for a pie that big, is still going to be an enormous amount of money. So maybe it's that. Maybe there's a little bit of give and take there. It means that he's back in the octagon, and I think that's really valuable for the UFC, especially now. They've not had many real blockbuster shows so far this year. We've had some good events, but nothing that's real blockbuster level. So maybe there's a little bit of to and fro going on, a bit of back and forth there. I think it's really interesting, and we're in that sort of time frame now where we're going to start learning of matchups that are being made for that sort of week. It's not going to be a triple header that week. It's going to be a double header that week. There's no Thursday event. There's going to be the tough finale on the Friday, and then UFC 213 on the Saturday. So, and it sounds like Robbie Lawler, Cowboy Cerrone has been targeted for that event, which would be an absolute banger of a fight to put on that 213 card. But yeah, I think there might be some legs in it, Sandy. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, potentially it'll be interesting to see how things develop. As we always say, Simon, nothing is impossible in this sport. So let's see how that kind of news story develops in the next couple of days.
Absolutely. Well, that's the rumour and speculation and crackpot theorising out the window. Let's talk about something that we can discuss with some sense of certainty. UFC on Fox took place this past weekend in Kansas City, Missouri, and it delivered a night to remember for the UFC flyweight division and a night to remember for Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson. He equals Anderson Silva's UFC record by defending his flyweight title for a 10th time with a submission win over Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt Wilson Hayes. As performances go, it was virtually flawless. I couldn't pick many holes in it at all, and he said afterwards, "I'm the best fighter to ever set foot in this octagon," and I think he's right. And you know, some people have said no, he's not as good as GSP, or he's not as good as Anderson Silva. I don't know. I think he might be. I think he might be the best fighter we've ever seen in the UFC. His body of work, he's done it over an extended period of time. I know we've probably got some questions about this later on, so we won't go into massive depth on stuff like the depth of the division, but I don't know if we've seen a more accomplished, well-rounded, technically skilled fighter ever in the UFC than Demetrious Johnson. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's debatable, isn't it? First of all, I do agree with you, Simon. Right, but just to play devil's advocate, if people want to throw John Jones' name in there, Anderson Silva's name, George St. Pierre's name as the greatest of all time, I'm happy and willing to listen to those arguments, and that's what makes this sport so fun. Especially when you add Demetrious Johnson's name into the equation, you've got 3 or 4 guys now that you can have a reasonable and sensible debate regarding who is the best of all time or the greatest of all time. But putting that to the side for the time being, I'm just really, really happy to see Demetrious almost puff out his chest a little bit. That was a fantastic post-fight interview he had with Brian Stan. And it was, and like even the post-fight press conference, for him to be the one that started to shout out himself and say, you know what, I'm better than George St. Pierre, I'm better than Anderson Silva, forget about me, breaking the record. I'm looking at 12, 13, 14 title defenses, And I think for so long he was a little ho-hum. He perhaps was a little bit too humble. He wasn't really giving us too many sound bites. I thought the whole package throughout the entire week, the promotion of the UFC side to really push this video gamer by day, MMA fighter by night, fantastic stuff. It's the first time I've actually seen them really push his other job or another side of his personality. And I think with this video game kind of career that he's got, that's going to be something that he's going to be able to make a living off well after his MMA career is all done and dusted. Look, I mean, Demetrious Johnson, he's not going to break any records on pay-per-view. They've put him on UFC on Fox. The ratings have come out. It wasn't one of their more higher rated shows. It was more on the low end. And I guess what that tells you is, like, the hardcore MMA community, they're going to watch Demetrious Johnson. They are going to have a tough time of trying to get casuals and the mainstream viewers to tune in to watch him fight. And I think at this point, perhaps everybody in the media, everyone in the community is just kind of like, well, if that's the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be, and it's their loss. If people can't tune into Demetrious Johnson but will tune into a Ronda Rousey fight or a Conor McGregor fight, that's absolutely fine. That's just the way the cookie crumbles in the modern age of sports and entertainment. I'm just fortunate and thankful that we're living in a time that the sport is still so young. We're looking at about 25 years old this sport is, and already we've got 3 or 4 fighters that we can really have a proper conversation about and start to kind of stack their record against each other and say, right, who is the best? Well, right now, given that John Jones isn't active, given that John Jones didn't have the best performances last time out, and given the fact that he hasn't held that light heavyweight championship in quite some time either, due to his own wrongdoing, you have to say, without a shadow of a doubt, Demetrious Johnson is the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. Absolutely no doubt about it.
Yeah, and he doubled down on those comments in the post-fight press conference. He came out with some absolute dynamite stuff in the post-fight press conference, talking about, let me see if I can find it. I had the quote here somewhere, but it was along the lines of, I'm not out drink driving, I'm not hitting my wife, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. I get up, I fight for a living, and I'm the best in the world at what I do. And there is nobody in his weight class who can touch him, and if anybody wants to move down and take him on, then he's more than happy. Cody Garbrandt wants to fight him. If he can make 125, Demetrious Johnson said he's happy to fight him. So I've got no problem with that. I think all this talk about, he has to move up, he doesn't have to move up to cement his legacy, because you just don't. How many times has George St. Pierre fought outside of the welterweight division? He hasn't. He's been welterweight all the way through. No one has questioned him. Anderson Silva dabbled with light heavyweight, but never fought a world championship caliber fighter at light heavyweight. So that hasn't done much. That hasn't done anything significant for his legacy. So no one's really questioning that. No one's questioning John Jones because he hasn't moved up to heavyweight. Do you know what I mean? So why have these same question marks over Demetrious Johnson? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I agree with you. Yeah, he is the best fighter in the world right now. And I think because the sport is constantly evolving, it stands to reason that in general, the champions who are in place today are better fighters than the champions who were in place 10 years ago, just because the sport has evolved over those 10 years. Now, if those athletes who were champions then were in their prime now, would they be champions now? That's where the debate gets a little bit tricky. But if you're looking at what they did then compared to what the guys are doing now, there's a huge... Go back and look at some of those old fights. And it is night and day sometimes. Some of the techniques that these top guys are throwing, and Demetrious does it better, faster, quicker, slicker. The way he finished Wilson Hayes was just absolutely off the charts. It was brilliant. But he wasn't the only talking point to come out of this event. It's so nice as well, Sandhu. I know last week you weren't able to be on the show, but it was like we spent almost as much time talking about cock-ups than we were talking about great performances. You know what I mean? There was controversy and all sorts going on. It was nuts. This week we had a great event, some amazing fights, and some really, really good performances. The co-main event, Rose Namajunas beating Michelle Waterson, hugely impressive. And I can't see a situation where Rose isn't going to be next for that strawweight title. She surely is next in line now to take on the winner of Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Jessica Andrade. Almost flawless herself. Michelle Waterson's a dangerous fighter, former world champion, albeit at a lower weight class. Was really looking to attack the legs with her kicks, but didn't really land too much offense other than that. Rose really put in a dominant display and then got that second round rear naked choke. But that wasn't until she absolutely flattened Waterson with that huge head kick. Amazing performance from Thug Rose. And I think she's still growing in the sport. She's not hit her peak yet. That was as good as we've seen, I think.
Yeah, and I kind of go back to what I was saying about Demetrious Johnson earlier on. The UFC did a great job of promoting him. I thought the UFC, by a country mile, their best job promotion last week was for Rose and for Michelle. Their Road to the Octagon stories were really well told. For those that didn't know, it gave a few more layers, got you emotionally invested in both these girls, which is what you want, and all the boys and girls in the UFC, especially guys and girls that are fighting in the main card or main and co-main that perhaps need a little bit of building up. They're in that contendership kind of status, waiting to get the next crack at the title. Those are the fighters that you need to start putting a lot of hustle and muscle behind so that the stories are told. So I thought the UFC again did a fantastic job of promoting both fighters. Rose, like you said, Simon, she looks better and better every time she fights. It's almost like you're seeing an evolution. Every time she fights, it's almost as if she's added about 3 or 4 new sets of skills in her locker, and then she'll go out and put that on display. Her striking was fantastic. You mentioned the head kick, absolutely highlight reel stuff there. You want to see that kind of stuff in slow motion. And then she took Michelle's back and tapped her out with her rear naked choke. And yeah, I think what you do with Rose now is you fly her to Dallas so she can be cage side. for Jessica Andrade versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and 100% she should be next in line for the next strawweight title fight.
Yeah, you talk about the promotional muscle, and they really did do a good job with that fight. Completely agree with that. Someone they're going to need to do a similar job with now is Robert Whittaker. I'm done underestimating this guy now. When he moved up from welterweight, I thought it was a bad move. I thought he'd be undersized in the middleweight division. Turned out to be the best move of his career. And against Ronaldo Jacare Souza, who, by the way, could not have timed that contract signing any better. Boy, oh boy, did he dodge a bullet. Because if he hadn't have signed that contract, you could bet he probably wouldn't be getting the same terms right now. You know what I mean? One fight can change so much. And Robert Whittaker just showed the world that A, he has the power and the smarts to beat the very best guys in that middleweight division. But the thing that really struck me was the composure of the man. Even when he got taken down by Jacare, and they referenced it in the commentary, and he mentioned it during fight week, that when Jacare takes people down, they panic. And that only hastens their demise, you know? If you're on the mat with Jacare Souza on your back, you need to have a completely clear head, because you need to know what you need to do to survive that situation. Robert Whittaker had that problem very early on in the fight and dealt with it and got out of it, and then came flying back. And to finish Jacare the way he did, big head kick, lots of punches. He'd hurt Jacare once or twice before that point, so it wasn't like a flash knockout or anything. He systematically broke him down. Huge performance from the man who wants to call himself the Reaper, but everybody thanks. I think it's Chad Dundas and Ben Folks on the Co-Main Event podcast have christened him Bobby Knuckles, and Bobby Knuckles has just become a star, and it's great for our friends down under. We've got our buddies from Submission Radio, Emma Challenge as well, friend of ours. They must be absolutely buzzing. They've got someone who really has a shot of becoming a world champion in the UFC. Amazing performance, Sandhu.
Absolutely. You mentioned Australia, and technically he's born in New Zealand, but his citizenship and nationality is Australian. And for that part of the world where the UFC does tend to bring at least one big event to every year, how great is it for them now to have someone like Robert Whittaker who can easily headline a show? You've got Mark Hunt there still, but obviously things are always a bit of a grey area, in terms of where you stand with Mark Hunt, and who knows how things will kind of progress moving forward with him, especially as he's now kind of probably into the twilight years of his career. Whereas Robert, we're 26, he's 26 years old, and like you said, Simon, I'm also not going to underestimate him anymore. I mean, I was picking Ronaldo Jacare Souza to win this fight, which I think, if everyone's being quite honest with themselves, I think 90 to 95% of folks were picking him to win. It was probably just the type of fight people thought that would keep him busy for the time being until he can try and finagle his way into a title shot. I did not see this type of performance coming from Robert Whittaker. He was able to withstand all the takedown attempts that Jacare was throwing against him, and then he just lit him up. And there was I suppose there wasn't controversy, but there was a little bit of a talking point with the end of the fight. And it was Mario Yamasaki, because there was a point where Jacare looked completely out, where you thought Mario was going to step in and stop the fight. And I think everybody would have been happy for him to have stopped the fight there and then. But he kind of stepped back again, let the fight continue. And then when Jacare actually then starts to make an attempt to defend himself intelligently and scramble and actually start to make a move where you think he's going to probably get back on his feet, that's when Mario steps in to stop the fight. And that's where you're like, you're pulling hair out, thinking why? But I think, in reflection, looking back at the instant replay, and that's the thing, sometimes you see things play in real time, you're giving an opinion on Twitter, but then when you see things in a second and third slow motion replay, Jacare was a goner. He was done. And now you've got the likes of Luke Rockhold calling out Robert Whittaker. All of a sudden, he is flavor of the month. Everyone's going to probably be calling him out because everyone might be thinking, actually, you know what? They might still be underestimating him. They might still think of Robert Whittaker as an easy fight at middleweight to keep themselves busy until this whole Bisping GSP situation resolves itself. But fantastic performance by Bobby Knuckles, and whether he likes it or not, that's what I think the MMA bubble is going to call him moving forwards. That was definitely a coming of age, a star-making performance, and we've got yet another middleweight contender on our hands.
And a great post-fight speech as well. You know, he's a very unassuming guy. He's not a trash talker. And he said it in kind of a modest, sort of half-jokey way. But he looked down the camera and went, "Oh, Bisping, you owe me a fight." And he's dead right. They were supposed to fight at 193, I think it was. And, you know, the fight never happened. So I thought that's a nice little narrative to throw into the pot as well. The fact that these two should have fought already. On the topic of the stoppage from Mario Yamasaki, I'm not upset with the fact that the fight was stopped. I think arguably the stoppage was so late it ended up looking early. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like if he'd have stopped it when he probably should have stopped it, then I don't think anyone would have complained. But he left it, and he left it so late past that point that it then looked like an early stoppage because Jacare looked to be at least trying to extricate himself from the position. But no arguments. I mean, you looked at Jacare Souza before the fight, and then you looked at him standing there after the fight. Two black eyes. He looked like he looked like he'd aged 10 years in those 2 rounds. It was incredible. But yeah, Bobby Knuckles is the man moving forward, and looking forward to seeing what happens to him. And that's a dangerous fight for Luke Rockhold, by the way. Rockhold will have a huge height and reach advantage, but Whittaker's got knockout power, and his knockout power is far more demonstrable than Michael Bisping's knockout power. Michael Bisping knocked out Luke Rockhold. So if that would be a fascinating bout to have, and if they could hold that one down under, then so much the better. Maybe the winner of that gets a shot. I don't know, but Whittaker needs a bout. Luke Rockhold needs a bout. I think most people would have been happy to see Rockhold versus Jacare. Doesn't make much sense now, does it? So maybe Bobby Knuckles versus Luke Rockhold is the bout to make moving forward. The other fight on that main card, very quickly, Renato Moicano defeated Jeremy Stephens by split decision. Very, very close fight. Very tricky fight to score. I think Stephens was the local favourite. Lots of boos, but it was a close fight. There were some good performances on this card. Alexander Volkov looked good against Roy Nelson. Rashid Magomedov against Bobby Green was an interesting clash of styles. Perhaps not the best fight on the card. Tim Elliott and Louis Smolka was a great fight. If you love your scrambles on the mat, go back and watch that one. Aljamain Sterling against Augusto Mendes was an interesting one to watch. Devin Clark looked good. Anthony Smith on the Fight Pass prelims. Absolutely phenomenal come from behind performance to knock out Andrew Sanchez, who was being talked to the heavens as a potential future contender in the middleweight division when Anthony Smith was having none of that and knocked him out in the 3rd round. Great performance. Zach Cummins doing the business against Nathan Coy, doing a great job on the mic, and Ketlin Vieira upsetting Ashley Evans-Smith. Now, there's one fight I wanted to talk about, Sandhu. Didn't mention it there. It's a man that we have both seen compete on these shores. Mr. Tom Duquesnoy, former 2-weight world champion for Bama, made his UFC debut against Patrick Williams, and he did the business.
He certainly did, Simon. Sometimes I always take any prospect that comes into the UFC from whatever region of the world, whether you're a local regional champion from Europe, from Asia, from Brazil, from North America. The minute you step into the UFC, it's a whole other level. It's like you're playing in a championship, and then all of a sudden you're playing in the Premier League and you're playing in the Champions League. It's a world apart. Not just from an opponent standpoint, but it's everything else involved. The media responsibilities, the spotlight, the arena, the number of people that you're fighting in front of. It's just, black and white. It really is. So I'm always kind of a little bit anxious to see how some of these prospects perform on that big stage. And he performed really, really well. Was it perfect? It wasn't perfect. did the UFC match him up really, really well? Yes, they did. Patrick Williams is basically a wrestler who is coming off an almost 2-year layoff. And I think that was the right. That's how you matchmake. I know a lot of people rag on Bellator about this kind of matchmaking, but that's how you matchmake guys that are up and coming, that are young. You start to build them up, before you start throwing them to the wolves, so to speak, right? So I thought Tom Firekid Duquesnoy did really, really well. Patrick Williams did get his hands on him a couple of times, and I think with a more established, more skilled striker, especially, I think Tom will find himself in a bit of trouble. But he's young, and that's why I like the matchmaking. You take your time with somebody like him, you build him up. I'd love to have him on some European cards this year. Maybe Glasgow or Rotterdam or Poland. Any one of those, happy days. I thought that his overall performance was really, really well. He did the old Jean-Claude Van Damme splits that's become his trademark now. And it's just unfortunate that MMA is still illegal in France, because you've got guys like Tom Duquesnoy and Francis Ngannou, just to name two, that could literally be superstars within their own home country. But again, it's just yet another European fighter that's come up through the ranks of the regional circuit here. In Tom's case, it's through BAMA, and he's done the business for the very first time in his UFC debut. Tip of the hat to him.
Yeah, you can throw Cole Amasu into the mix as well. He's the Cage Warriors welterweight champion. I wouldn't be surprised if he joins the UFC before the summer.
He's overdue. Well overdue.
Yeah, he's legit, and he's got a hell of a record to back it up as well. So I wouldn't be surprised. So we could see 3 absolutely sort of charging prospects from France in the UFC very soon. But Tom Duquesnoy, he's a talent. As you say, he's young. He did get hit a little bit in that fight, and I think anybody who's higher up on the food chain at bantamweight, and that bantamweight division is stacked, they'll take a look at him and go, well, I can hit him, and if I can hit him, I can beat him, because there are some powerhouses as you move up that division. That said, because it is such a deep division, you can slow play him. He's only young.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We've got other good bantamweights on the way up. You've got Brett Johns fighting out of Wales as an example. He's undefeated. A former Cage Warriors bantamweight champion during the time that Tom Duquesnoy was the BAMA bantamweight champion. So there's an interesting potential matchup you could make there. The two champions from the 2 most respected UK and Irish-based promotions going head-to-head under the UFC banner. That would be a cracking matchup for a European-based card in Glasgow or Rotterdam or wherever. But I do think I wouldn't necessarily pitch him any higher than that at this stage, just as I wouldn't with Brett Johns. Brett Johns isn't getting the same amount of hype that Tom Duquesnoy is getting. But Brett Johns is a legit prospect as well, and I think both of those guys, if they're match made properly, we could see a couple of European prospects really rising up the ladder, and I think that would be a good thing for the growth of the sport in this part of the world. I think it would be great for France in Duquesnoy's in Duquesnoy's case as well. But he looked really good. I mean, he's 15-1-1, and his one defeat came in his 5th fight to Makwan Amirkhani, of all people. Where are we? 2.5 minutes submission. But other than that, it's been plain sailing. There was a no contest with Ashley Grimshaw. There was a very, very close split decision with Brendan Loughnane, who a lot of people thought won that fight. He's a guy who deserves a shot in UFC as well, by the way. Isn't it great that we've got these fighters now who they're coming through? We can almost see the next wave of talent ready to make the step up. It's really encouraging. We've got people like Saul Rogers, who obviously he needs to bounce back from his recent defeat at ACB, but he's definitely ready for a move to the UFC. Brendan Loughnane is ready for a move to the UFC. And Tom Duquesnoy's been ready for a little while. I understand he's turned them down a couple of times, much like Jimmy Manuwa did, before he eventually signed. Now he feels he's ready. He's in the UFC, and let's see the lad go. Did just want to talk about him because he looks like a serious prospect, and he's not British, and we are the Brit Pack, but he made his name fighting here in the UK, so we will definitely be following him with interest. That was UFC on Fox from Kansas City, Missouri. Apparently didn't do that well in terms of the TV ratings. Apparently it was one of the lowest, if not the lowest rated ever. And you touched upon it earlier. If you aren't tuning in to watch a man of the ability of Demetrious Johnson fight, then more fool you, right? He is the top of the food chain. He is the most evolved version of the species when it comes to mixed martial arts. Hopefully the fact that he's becoming a bit more vocal will only help him going forward. So good show that. I enjoyed that. And we've got a good one coming up this weekend, which we'll talk about in a bit. But we mixed things up last week by doing a Q&A halfway through, and it seemed to fit quite nicely. So let's do that again this week, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A.
Yeah, and once again, just to remind everybody, it's at the Brit Pack MMA. That's where you can catch us on Twitter. Throw your questions at us throughout the week. I'll give it a like so you know that it'll be asked on the show. The first one this week comes from Stephen Murray, who says, now that Mauro Ranallo is not working for the WWE, I think Bellator or the UFC should sign him up ASAP. Do you agree? So just to kind of give a bit of context to this, Mauro Ranallo was working for the WWE for a while. There's been I suppose you can call it rumor, controversy. There's been quite a few stories out, not by, I suppose, the main players, the big corporate media outlets, but definitely a few of the big hitters, and it's all surrounding his potential bullying by one John Bradshaw Layfield that may have led to his departure. We can all speculate all day long. This isn't a pro wrestling or WWE podcast, but I wanted to give a bit of context. But the main thing is that Mauro Ranallo and the WWE have parted ways. The WWE said that they're going to honor his contract until August, so I'm sure he'll still be collecting some paychecks up until then. But since then, he's been able to kind of still get some work in. Now, he worked for Ryzen this past weekend in Japan. He got back with his old commentary booth buddy, Frank Shamrock. And during the broadcast, and actually on Twitter, he has said that he'll be back covering pro wrestling. And he'll also be doing some boxing for Showtime. And he did say that he's looking forward to being here in London for that big Joshua Klitschko fight. So, look, I think Mauro's going to be fine. He's still one of the most high-in-demand commentators in any combat sport or pro wrestling, period. So I don't think there's any lack of offers coming his way. Now, would I love to see him in the UFC? Absolutely. It's always been a dream of mine to see him in the UFC. What do I think is more likely? I think it's not out of this world that we may perhaps someday in the future, maybe this year, maybe next year, perhaps see him in the Bellator commentary booth. I know that Scott Coker and the folks over at Ryzen have a pretty solid relationship in terms of sharing talent when it comes to fighters. It's probably not going to be out of this world if they start to share some commentary commentators. Sorry. So yeah, I think given the fact that WME IMG are now in control of the UFC, any chances of Mauro in the UFC commentary booth, given that they're trying to promote all these fighters turned commentators and Brian Stan, Daniel Cormier, and Dominic Cruz, I think that's who they're trying to nurture up the food chain as future commentators. I think you'll probably see Mauro in Bellator way sooner than the UFC. Your thoughts, Simon, though, on Mauro as a commentator, his work, as a commentator, both perhaps in pro wrestling and in MMA and combat sports, and what your thoughts are in potentially working for Bellator or UFC one day?
I think he's the best in the business at what he does. I really do. And he can easily move between pro wrestling, boxing, mixed martial arts, and he instantly lends credibility to what you're watching on the screen. And he has a style that is very, very unique. He's got a very sort of high energy commentary style, and it's not for everyone. Some people like to have a little bit of a less is more approach. Certainly in the UK, they prefer things to be a bit quieter. But in mixed martial arts, Mauro Ranallo for me is the best in the business. And I know we're never going to see this. I would love them to reunite Mauro and Baz Rutten in the commentary box. That is the commentary dream team right there. And they have different commentary teams. John Gooden and Dan Hardy do a phenomenal job. John Anik is clearly the number one play-by-play man right now, and they're mixing and matching him with different analyst talent. And I think he works brilliantly with Brian Stan. I think as a pair, they're the best two. I think as a three, Dominic Cruz and Rogan with him, I think works quite well. But they're still working on the 3-man dynamic. But 3 words: hire the man, Mauro Ranallo. Someone has got to find that man a home. And as you say, he's not going to have a problem finding paychecks, but he should be calling the biggest fights in the world. And I would love to see him in the UFC. I agree with you. I think he's more likely to go work for Scott Coker. He's worked for Scott Coker before. He called fights for Strikeforce. So there's previous there. Get him back in the booth. And I think it would be perfect. Interesting, he talked about the pro wrestling thing. I don't know where he's going to land there. Whether Impact Wrestling have got enough money to get him. That would instantly lift their product. Imagine someone of his status working with a brand like Impact Wrestling that have been struggling a little bit in recent months. He could go to Japan, where he's obviously a name in Japan from his days commentating in Pride. So I think he's brilliant. I love the way he's an advocate for mental health issues and things like that. He's very well known that he's got bipolar. He even calls himself the bipolar rock and roller, which it's not him making light of it. It's him putting it out there in a way that people won't be completely switched off by it. And it's a shame if these stories, and I think Dave Meltzer's probably the most credible person to have really led with this. If these stories are true, then it's such a shame, especially when the WWE, one of their biggest charities, is an anti-bullying charity. So they've created this initiative. So if that's being undermined from within, then that's a real shame as well. But fingers crossed we see and hear a lot more of him. He's a great fit for Rising though, because it's just like Pride all over again. But they need to put him and Buzz Rutten back together again. They're the dream team. We need to have a bit of that. That would be great. But all the time in the world for him. I think he's a star.
Daryl Chumbley tweets in and says, is Mighty Mouse that good, or is the 125-pound division a weak division? There's just no question about it. Demetrious Johnson is just that damn good. If he wasn't the champion, I think you might see that belt be passed around quite a bit with the rest of that top 10, top 15. They're really good fighters. That's the elite of the elite that's in the UFC, in that flyweight division. And he's just great. He's just that damn good, And it's kind of like one of those situations where, because he's so dominant, and he's not winning like GSP. It's not decision after decision after decision. Yes, there's 1 or 2 decisions in there in the record of 10 title defenses, but most of them are finishes. And not only that, he's beating these fighters at their own game. Like Wilson Hayes is a world champion jiu-jitsu practitioner, and he submitted him with a 3rd round armbar. He beat him at his own game. And prior to that, he was lighting him up. The ratio of strikes landed between Hayes and Demetrious Johnson, I think Demetrious Johnson got over 100, and Wilson Hayes got, I think, 12 or 13. So that's the disparity between the number of shots landed between the two fighters. So very simply, Mighty Mouse is just that damn good.
Yeah, I think it's such an easy thing for people to say, well, he's got no competition. If he wasn't in the division, people would go, wow, what a great division. The title keeps changing hands. It's so deep. Everyone's fighting everybody else and the belt keeps changing. What a tough, tricky division this is to pick. That's not happening because there's this one guy at the top who's just better than everybody else. And GSP did it at welterweight, and people started to get bored a little bit with him. I know everybody is excited that he's coming back, and rightly so. But let's not forget, there was a time when people were saying, "Oh, GSP, he's a lay and pray fighter. He's not." Ever since he got knocked out, he's been a risk-averse fighter. He stopped throwing the the flashy strikes that he used to do when he first arrived in the UFC. He's gone to this wrestling game plan and, grinding out decisions. This is not what we get with Demetrious Johnson. He goes in there, works you out, finds out how he can beat you, and then beats you. The Kyoji Horiguchi fight, if you've got a spare half an hour to spare, or a spare 40 minutes to spare, go back and watch the Kyoji Horiguchi fight. It went 4 rounds and then 4 minutes and 59 seconds of the 5th round. He submitted him in the last second of the last round of a 5-round world title fight. A fight where he was winning, I think, every round on every scorecard. He didn't need to do it. He did it because he could. And that's the thing. And he's gone on, he's gone the distance with a couple of guys. Henry Cejudo was supposed to be the next big test. Olympic wrestler. He took Cejudo down. Olympic gold medal winning wrestler. He took Cejudo down and smashed him. TKO finish. Didn't get out the first round. Wilson Hayes, Jiu-Jitsu black belt. What did he do? Took him to the mat, finished him by submission. He's just too good. And I don't care what anybody says about anybody else in that division. That is a decent division, and he's beating good guys. Joe Benavidez could easily be the world champion. Henry Cejudo could easily be the world champion. John Dodson could easily be the world champion. But they're not, because Demetrious Johnson. And that's it. That's it. He is the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. If he weighed 170 pounds, he'd be the welterweight champion. If he weighed 205, he'd be the light heavyweight champion, even with John Jones in there. I'll maintain that. And that's what makes him, in my eyes, the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world.
Final question comes in from Mickey, who says, I picked Whittaker against Jacare, but I wasn't expecting Jacare to look instantly old. Is Father Time catching up to him? It certainly appears that way. I mean, he is 37 going on 38.
That's not old.
Maybe not old for an MMA journalist, but if you're an elite mixed martial artist fighting in the UFC and you're fighting a 26-year-old Kiwi by the name of Bobby Knuckles, then that might have something to do with it. You know what? I've always had this thing where if you can get out of that first round with Jacare, and you can start to build up a bit of body sweat. Obviously, it's a known fact. The later the fight goes, unless you're Demetrious Johnson, of course, the later the fight goes, it does become a little bit harder for jiu-jitsu practitioners to try and get a body lock on you or a rear naked choke, because it's just hard in the scramble to kind of keep a hold of a limb or your neck and whatnot. But considering how much muscle mass Jacare carries around with him, I've always been a little bit cautious of someone perhaps getting through that first round and then being able to give him a run for his money. And that's exactly what happened in this fight with Robert Whittaker. Jacare had many attempts to try and take him down. Robert Whittaker withstood all those attempts, especially in that first round, and then it only took him about 90 seconds or so of the second round to get the job done. Now, is Father Time catching up with him? That's a very interesting question, because up until now, aside from that fight with Romero, which I think you and me, Simon, agree he actually won, he's looked great. He looked pretty flawless, but he's just signed an 8-fight contract with the UFC. This past weekend was fight number 1, so he's got 7 fights. He's got 7 fights to go. Will he fulfill that entire contract? In hindsight, would it have perhaps been better to see him, fight in Bellator, where perhaps the competition isn't as much, and maybe he could still, make those big paydays and perhaps be their champion? Who knows? But right now, he is still a top 10 middleweight in a weight class that is absolutely stacked full of killers. I don't know what you do with him next. I really don't. Because you've got Gegard Mousasi, who's now testing the free agency market. He isn't technically a UFC fighter right now, and I'm sure he'll be making a case to get a first crack at the middleweight title next. You've got Yoel Romero, that was apparently being taken care of by Dana White and the UFC before his deserved title shot was scuppered with GSP coming back. So it's a very interesting time in that middleweight division. I don't know how to answer the question, Simon. I'm a little bit stumped, because a part of me thinks that I don't think Jacare can do with many more performances like the one he had on Saturday. I think if the next time he comes out, we see him struggle like the way he did on Saturday against an opponent of the caliber of a Robert Whittaker. Now, whether that's against a Masasi or against a Rockhold or somebody in that top 5, top 6, we don't know. But if he does, then yeah, I think I'll start to think, well, you know what, maybe time has passed him by. Maybe it's unfortunate he never got his crack at a UFC title a year or two ago. Right now, I'm still 50-50. I still have hope that he can, get back to training camp, get back to his gym, refocus his attention, get a game plan put together. Maybe one foot was thinking elsewhere. Maybe he was underestimating Robert Whittaker. Maybe he was coming into this fight thinking, right, well, that just keeps me busy. It's another payday. It keeps things ticking along until the middleweight title picture resolves itself. Now he's going to have a fire lit under him to come back and show everybody what he's all about. Stick him on a Brazil card in the next 6 months or so, right? Let's kind of build him back up again. So yeah, I'm not ready to call father time on him just yet, especially because a fighter that tends to use jiu-jitsu more than any other skill set, they tend to be able to fight for longer as well. And we've seen what Damian Maia's been able to do in the latter part of his career. He reinvented himself, came to a new weight class, and he's now poised to get a crack at the next title as long as he wins his next fight. What are your thoughts, Simon? As somebody that's in his late 30s, what's your thoughts on Jacare being a 37-year-old? And do you think by the time he has caught up with him, or do you still give him some time yet?
I wish I was in my late 30s, mate. I'm 40.
I was trying to give you a bit of credit.
Oh, no, sadly not. Over the hill, mate, over the hill. Here's the thing, right? And it's very easy in the immediate aftermath of something to overestimate or completely underestimate somebody because it's very fresh. And fight sports are very polarizing. You win or you lose, and especially when you get stoppages, you're either top of the world, bottom of the heap. You know what I mean? Highest to highs, lowest to lows, I think our buddy John Morgan likes to say. And it's dead right. That was his first stoppage defeat for 9 years. 9 years. And that came courtesy of a Gegard Mousasi upkick in Dream, which was in just his 12th fight. This fight we just had was his 30th. And he's not been stopped in that span. So from fight 13 to fight 29 inclusive, hasn't been stopped. He's only lost by decision. Luke Rockhold, and then very controversially, Yoel Romero. So he's not really been in any serious trouble. He certainly hasn't been stopped or anything like that. Whittaker stopped him. That for me is more of a reflection on Whittaker rather than a reflection on Jacare. It might be the sign of a decline. We won't know until the next fight. And that next fight is going to be crucial. And you said you weren't sure quite how to pitch him, maybe put him in Brazil. I think the key to this is Gegard Mousasi because I don't think Gegard Mousasi's that interested in fighting Chris Weidman again. If he doesn't fight Chris Weidman, Jacare Weidman makes a hell of a lot of sense. They're both coming off losses. In Weidman's case, 3 in a row. And it's a fight that both guys, they're both world championship caliber middleweights. One of them needs to move up. So it kind of makes sense that those two fight, whether it be in Brazil, whether it be on an East Coast event later in the year, because they're going back to Madison Square Garden, right? They've got to be going back again. So maybe they could do that later in the year. Jacare's certainly going to need a bit of time off. Weidman, I don't know what his movements are likely to be. He's currently appealing that Gegard Mousasi fight at the moment. But that would make a lot of sense to me. But beyond that, it's hard to know quite what to do with Jacare. Just looking at the rankings, you've really not got any obvious ones. Because why would Rockhold fight him when he's ranked above and Jacare's coming off a loss? Why would Mousasi fight him when he's on the up? Jacare's coming off a loss. The next man up is Anderson Silva. They're not going to fight. Derek Brunson's the next guy. Derek Brunson maybe. I don't know. I mean, unless you do the Yoel Romero rematch just to keep Romero busy. I don't know, but there's not a huge upside for Romero to win that fight either. So, it's for me the fight that makes the most sense from a divisional standpoint is Weidman. But it's an absolute killer of a fight for whoever loses. It really is, especially Weidman. That could be 4 on the spin. Granted, the last one was controversial, but the record will read 4 in a row. So, but yeah, that to me would be the obvious one. I'm not prepared to write him off yet. He's had 1 knockout loss to a guy who specialises in knocking people out. So, and we've seen plenty of fighters get knocked out in a far, far worse manner than we've seen Jacare beat at the weekend, and they've come back and done great things. So I'm not prepared to write him off yet. I think he's still a major player in that middleweight division. So they need to keep him in there by giving him a fight with someone in that top 5 or 6. And Weidman for me is the guy.
Well, I appreciate everyone sending in their questions. And like I said, it's at the BritPack MMA on Twitter. Send them through. We've got a busy schedule of UFC events coming up, and business is certainly going to be picking up over these next couple of months. A lot of title fights, a lot of big blockbuster pay-per-views coming up. So me and Simon are going to be back on it on a weekly basis now. So do send us your questions. We'll be more than happy to get them on the show.
And don't be shy. Send them in whenever you've got them. If you've watched a show on TV or you've read an article somewhere and it's just stirred up a question in your mind and you want us to talk about it on the show, hit us up on Twitter at the BritPack MMA. You can tweet us whenever you like. As Sandhu said, he will put a little like on those questions that he wants to include on the show. We will always try and answer as many of them as we can, but it's it's his way of saying we've seen the question, we're going to do our best to get it on the show. So get the questions in whenever you can, and we will always do our best to answer them. So we normally do the Q&A at the end, but we've put it in the middle today because we've got a big UFC Fight Night event coming up this weekend. Now, some people will already be smirking at that comment because the main event has taken a little bit of a caning. Cub Swanson is taking on Artem Lobov in the main event of UFC Fight Night in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, whether or not you like the main event, and I think it's a main event where there's not a huge upside for Cub Swanson. There's an enormous upside for Artem Lobov, but also this is by far the biggest fight of his professional career. So it's going to take a big jump for him. A lot of people are hating on the fact that Artem's in that main event. It is what it is. I don't absolutely hate it, but I don't know whether it's a main event fight. So as a fight, it's a fight. So we'll see how that goes. Do not write off the card based on the 2 men on the poster. If you're inclined to do that, stop yourself, read the fight card, and just look at some of these matchups. Sandhu, let's just run through them. Al Iaquinta versus Diego Sanchez. Iaquinta hasn't fought in a fair while now. Diego Sanchez has been fighting forever. That's going to deliver fireworks, isn't it? That's the co-main.
Yeah, you'd think so. And I know Al Iaquinta's been at loggerheads with the UFC for quite some time. He really wanted to be a part of that MSG show last November, but just couldn't come to terms with the financials of the UFC. Took some time out, dabbled in a bit of real estate. Maybe he's still doing that. But eventually, he sorted things out. And he's one of the best lightweights in the world, Simon. I'm glad the UFC have patched things up with him. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of performance we're going to get out of him. Because it has been a while since he last fought. He last fought in April of 2015. So it's been quite. And the thing is, he beat Jorge Masvidal in that fight, via split decision. So, he's a really, really good fighter. And I'm glad that he's in a co-main event slot and not stuck somewhere, on the Fight Pass prelims or anything like that. Because I think even though the lightweight division is completely stacked, he's yet somebody else you can start to build up again and start to promote. And of course, Diego Sanchez, everyone knows who he is. He's been around for forever. He's the original Ultimate Fighter. Been alternating wins and losses for quite some time now. I want to know from his perspective, what his reason is to fight. Is it just to pick up some more paychecks? I don't know if this was the right fight for him to take. I'd like to just see him. I know Vitor Belfort said a while ago that he'd like to see a Legends League. Let's not have a Legends League. Why don't we just use the veterans that are available, still under contract, and still are very much active? I'd love to see a Diego Sanchez versus a Nick Diaz. Get that rematch going on again or something along that line. But I think this is going to be pretty easy work. If I'm honest, for Ally Quinter, I think this will be a nice comeback fight for him.
Yeah, I think the only question over Iaquinta is how much of an effect that big layoff is going to have on him. You would think,
Yeah.
all things being equal, Iaquinta should win this, but we know Diego Sanchez is as tough as old boots. He will keep fighting until he's got no breath left in his body, or the ref stops it, one or the other. But Iaquinta can bang, so that'll be an interesting fight. OSP is back in action, takes on Marcos Rogerio de Lima. But take a listen to these three fights and pick out your favourite from these, because these are all great, Sandhu. John Dodson versus Eddie Wineland at bantamweight. Joe Lauzon versus Scotland's Stevie Ray at lightweight. And at welterweight, Jake Ellenberger versus Mike Perry. Where on earth do you start with those three?
Well, I think with the Mike Perry-Jake Ellenberger fight, I think that's got a Mike Perry knockout written all over it. This is a guy who loves to headhunt, taking on a fighter that has got a very questionable chin in Jake Ellenberger. Now, Ellenberger, he was coming off a bunch of losses, finally got one back against Matt Brown, and then Masvidal just tore him to pieces in the first round last December. Overall, he is right now, as we currently speak, he is 2-6 in his last day. This is somebody that was once heralded as someone that could potentially fight for the welterweight championship. I've got a sneaky feeling if Mike Perry makes light work of Jake Ellenberger, this might be the last time you see him fight in the UFC. But in terms of a guaranteed finish, I think that's probably as close to a guaranteed finish as you're probably going to likely to get in terms of prediction from me from that main card, because Ellenberger doesn't really go to decision, and he loses a lot by knockout or submission. And Mike Perry, a lot of his finishes, I think the majority of them have all come by knockout, and they've all come pretty early. So, and the fact is that he's only gone to decision once, and that's when he lost. So unless Ellenberger is very tricky and crafty, sticks to a game plan, like Joban did against Mike Perry, I think we're going to see a Mike Perry knockout here.
Yeah, that Jake Ellenberger fight with Masvidal was a little bit controversial. If you remember, he got his foot caught in the cage.
Yeah.
And the fight was I think the fight was heading that way anyway.
It was.
But it was a bit controversial because he got his foot caught in the cage, and there was all sorts of issues going on around that. But it looked to me very much as if Masvidal was going to win that fight anyway, and it wouldn't have been that much longer before he got him out there. But Ellenberger's win over Matt Brown, I don't think anyone saw that coming. That was a hugely impressive performance. But yeah, against Mike Perry, you know what you're going to get. He fights like a man who's parked on a meter outside. He just wants to get in there, smash it to bits, and then get out again. And he's a very exciting guy to watch fight. And he's going to be hurt from that loss to Alan Joban. So he's going to want to show that you can't just stick and move your way to a win against him, which is what Joban effectively did. So expect a very, very aggressive Platinum Mike Perry in that fight. Let's talk about Joe Lauzon versus Stevie Ray. Lauzon is as seasoned as they come. You talk about a Legends League and all this sort of stuff, and he would definitely fit into that category. He's been around forever, so it seems. But Stevie Ray, this is probably the biggest name opponent of his career, I would say. He's in there with UFC, I wouldn't say, well, almost UFC royalty, almost. A guy who anyone who's been watching the UFC for any frequency over the last 15 years will know who Joe Lauzon is and know that he always brings the fight. Stevie Ray got himself a split decision win over Ross Pearson in Belfast. That was a super close fight, and it really could have gone either way, that bout. A very, very tough fight to score. Stevie Ray got the nod. I think it was his kicks that won him the fight. But yeah, I think against Joe Lauzon, he's up against a very different opponent. Someone who will be more than happy to take him to the mat and scramble with him. And Stevie Ray has shown in the past that he's happy to do that as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Stevie tested in this. I think Joe will give him a completely different look to most of the other opponents he's had so far.
Yes, Stevie, does compete in jiu-jitsu tournaments here and there. But I would still, if I'm him, I'm trying to keep this fight on its feet and perhaps not grapple and get into any ground exchange with Joe Lozon, because I just think he's the far more accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner. Whereas I think Stevie Ray's kind of key to victory here will be to stay on the outside and just try and pick Joe Lozon apart. And Lozon's been in the game a while, even though he's only 32. He's got a crap load of fights under his belt. It feels like he's been there forever. This is going to be his 40th professional fight, which is absolutely nuts. But I think for Stevie, being the European, this is a good name in Joe Lozon to have on a main card on Fox Sports. So what more do you want? It's a good profile for him, and if he wins, I'm sure he'll be clamoring to get on that Glasgow card in July.
Absolutely, that's the main card. So we've got a 6-fight main card. We've also got 4 more fights on the TV prelims as well. Just so you know, the TV prelims, everything is kind of the standard broadcast time for us boys and girls in the UK. So the Fight Pass prelims will probably start 11:30, 11:45, because it's only a 3-fight Fight Pass card this week on UFC Fight Pass, obviously. The TV prelims will kick off at 1. The main card will kick off at 3. But we've got that legendary Fox Sports pacing to look forward to. So make sure you've got a book to read or something between fights. So we've got some good stuff. The prelim card, we've got some good fights. Talis latest Sam Alvey. The sleeper for fight of the night is Dustin Ortiz versus Brandon Moreno at flyweight. That will be all sorts of craziness at 125. Scott Holtzman against Michael McBride is on that prelim card. Jessica Penne makes her return against Danielle Taylor. The Fight Pass prelims have got 2 superb bouts on there. Alexis Davis is back. She takes on the debuting Cindy Dandois at women's bantamweight. And Brian Barberena against Joe Proctor. Look out for that. If you've got UFC Fight Pass, that's another one that might potentially challenge as a potential fight of the night. And the Fight Pass prelims are kicked off by Hector Sandoval versus Matt Schnell. That is UFC... What's the number? UFC Fight Night 108 we're on now. From the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee, on Saturday night, April 22nd. That should be a good one. If you're picking a fight of the night candidate out of that list, where's your money going, Sandhu?
My fight of the night is probably going to be a toss-up between John Dodson, Eddie Wineland, and you know what? I think Dustin Ortiz versus Brandon Moreno. You call that one, and I like that idea as well. I think one of those 2 will probably end up being fight of the night.
Yeah, I do like that Dustin Ortiz Brandon Moreno fight a lot. I think that's going to be a whole lot of fun. That's a fun fight card. I know not everyone is overly enamoured with the Cub Swanson Artem Lobov fight. Let's quickly touch on that before we wrap things up, Sandhu.
Sure.
What does this fight do for Cub Swanson if he wins?
A paycheck.
Wow.
Well, I mean, look at Cub Swanson. He's ranked 4. He's fighting Artem Lobov, who's unranked. So you're not going to beat Artem Lobov and get the next title shot. I don't know what's happening with Cub Swanson right now. I don't know why he accepted this fight. I don't know if it was because Lobov goaded him on social media or what have you. Maybe from Cub Swanson's point of view, he's looking for an easier fight now. Maybe he's underestimating Lobov, given the fact that he just came out of a bloody war with Du Ho Choi.
What a fight that was, by the way.
Last December. So maybe he wants to take it a little bit easy for a while before he kind of steps back into the upper echelon of that featherweight division. But I'm just calling it like I see it, Simon. There is no upside, really. I mean, it's a main event. That's great. It's a headline on a Fox Sports card. That's fantastic. If he wins and uses the mic time to build up another big high-profile fight for him, which is in the upper echelon of that division, fantastic. That's what you should be doing. What he's done, though, after losing 2 high-profile fights against Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway, he's now started to build another run together. He's got a nice little streak going here. His run consists of Hakran Diaz, Tatsuya Kawajiri, and Du Ho Choi. So you add Artem Lobov to the mix, that's 4 wins in a row. Then you could perhaps try and vie for somebody in the top 5. I don't know who would make sense. You got Jeremy Stevens coming off a loss. I don't know, Frankie Edgar, I think, is booked, isn't he? He's got a fight coming up, I believe.
He has indeed. Yeah, he's taking. Who's Frankie? He's taking on Yair Rodriguez.
Maybe you could have say, hey, I'll fight the winner of Rodriguez versus Edgar, to see if he can still hang with the big boys and try and put himself into position to fight the winner of Aldo Holloway. But outside of being a main event and probably another nice little payday for him, I don't see what else this really does for him. Hopefully, from his perspective, it's just a showcase fight. For Lobov, massive upside, massive. You're fighting the number 4 ranked fighter in the world. It's a main event slot, and for someone that's many considered to be a journeyman, I'm just calling it like I see it, Simon. This is an absolutely brilliant opportunity, and it doesn't hurt the fact that he's entrenched in that McGregor camp. And who knows if Conor's going to be there. He was there cage side for him in Belfast last year. Who knows if he'll make the trip. I know John Kavanagh will probably be in his corner. So yeah, looking forward to seeing if the McGregor element plays any factor into that fight week, just given the fact that Lobov is his training partner.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, the whole thing with, I know that there are people who will hate on the main event, and I understand why. You've got the number 4 guy against an unranked guy when you have a division absolutely packed to the gills with potential contenders who are in ranked positions. But that's not Artem Lobov's fault. You know what I mean? He's been given a golden opportunity here, and I certainly don't think he deserves any hate for it. And I'm sure he might be getting a bit here and there. That's not on him. That's the UFC. The UFC have made the matchup, and if I'm Artem, I'm feeling pretty happy with this right now. He's got an opportunity to go in there. If he loses, then everyone expected him to lose anyway. You know what I mean? So it doesn't make an enormous difference. If he wins, then oh boy, then he's just got himself the biggest win of his professional career. He's on a 2-fight win streak. He beat Chris Avila at UFC 202 in a fight where I don't even know if Chris Avila threw a punch. And he beat Teruto Ishihara and actually looked very good, in all fairness. He did very good against Teruto Ishihara and put in definitely the best performance of his UFC career. Against Cub Swanson, it's going to be levels above anybody he's ever faced. Swanson will be an unbackable favourite going into the fight. It is what it is. It looks on paper, it looks like a mismatch. The bookmakers will price it as a mismatch, but this is a mixed martial arts fight, and I would never disrespect anyone who steps in there and fights. So I obviously think that Swanson is going to win the fight, but there's certainly I don't think there's anything bad you can say to Artem Lobov about this situation. Let him get in there and go for it, and you never know. It might happen, it might not. But if anyone's got any issue with the main event, that issue's with the matchmakers of the UFC. But like I said at the start, don't judge the card just on the 2 guys on the poster. Look down the fight card. Look at some of the matchups you got there. Look at some of the people who are actually going to be involved in that fight card. Mike Perry has never been in a bad fight that I've seen. I've been back and watched some of his old stuff as well. Found on YouTube and things. He's a psychopath. He's brilliant to watch. Joe Lozon wins bonuses almost every time he gets in the octagon because he's such an entertaining fighter. Diego Sanchez is a crazy man. Al Iaquinta is a potential contender in the lightweight division. John Dodson is the fastest man in the UFC. There's so many individual pieces to this puzzle that I think is well worth watching. Even if you turn off before the main event, watch the fight card. There's so much good stuff on there, and I'm actually looking forward to it. Doesn't have the big star power potentially at the very top, much like the London card that we covered a few months ago. That delivered. No reason why this one won't deliver as well. So that's UFC Fight Night this weekend. And that brings to an end episode number 35 of the Brit Pack. It's good to have you back, buddy.
It was good to be back. Final note I wanted to kind of quickly throw out there. It has been a couple of weeks since I've been on. If you've been watching the UFC on BT Sport the last couple of weekends, you would have noticed that Bellator have been promoting their London card Got to give them a shout out. That is fantastic advertising placement right there. Because you know that if you've got an MMA community that is willing to stay up until 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night watching UFC, they're going to be probably interested to find out that Rory McDonald and Paul Daly are going to be headlining the Bellator London card. So we saw a little bit of that at the London UFC show, Simon, where we saw posters and flyers and bits and pieces from Bellator. But I thought that was very smart of them to start actually putting some ads on during the UFC broadcast. We'll probably see that this weekend as well on BT Sport. Just wanted to kind of just throw that out there, give them a bit of a shout, because I think that's just good marketing.
It really is. It's absolute common sense marketing. As you said, they leafleted the fans. They had posters up. I think they had posters up on the tube coming up at North Greenwich Station when you got to the O2 on Fight Night. The Bellator branding was there, even though the fighters weren't. I think it's good for us in the UK that we've got other shows putting good events on, whether it be Bellator, whether it be Cage Warriors, whether it be BAMMA. Cage Warriors are coming back to London in a couple of months. I think they've got a show in Wales in a week or two's time. You've got BAMMA have got another show coming up in Birmingham in a month or so's time. It feels to me like sort of the bigger players in the MMA space are beginning to really ramp things up now, and it's for us in the UK, we're getting more good quality shows now than probably we've ever had. It's good. And we've got these prospects coming up through the ranks. It's really, really encouraging to see. But that wraps things up. Episode number 35. You can tweet us at the Britpack MMA, at Sandhu MMA, at Simon Head. Check out the website, thebritpackmma.com. You will find everything you need on there. If you subscribe on iTunes and you're enjoying this show, if you've been with us for any number of shows and you're still listening and enjoy what you're getting from us each week, jump on iTunes, leave us a little review and a rating, because that just helps push the show out to more people. It helps make our show a bit more discoverable on the iTunes store. So if you can do that, that would be awesome. We're also on Stitcher if you want to subscribe from that instead. We're on SoundCloud, we're on Acast, and we're also back on YouTube again. I've got us back up to date on there as well. So everything's going full steam ahead now with the Britpack. Episode number 36 will be next week. We'll look back on the Nashville event, and we will keep going every week. And we'll fly through the year. We'll hit that half-century mark before you know it. But thank you so much for listening, and we'll speak to you next week.